In this video lesson and corresponding code example, you can learn to program core Ajax Pagination. We will not be using any third-party frameworks or code libraries for PHP or JavaScript to accomplish this simple task. This way we can pass along the highest level of programming education and core code insight on this topic to you. So needless to say, after you complete this lesson, you'll possess a much greater level of understanding than your counterparts who might use third-party frameworks to accomplish Ajax PHP pagination. First, let's take a look at the live demo and the finished product of the lesson. And by default, when the page first loads, we ask Ajax for the first page worth of data. Then the user can gain access to all the subsequent pages just by pressing this arrow. So it says page 1 of 11 pages. So we're on page 1 of 11. Now I'm going to page 2. And you'll see for a second it says loading results. There's page 3 of 11. And when you're off of page 1, we give them a back arrow. When we get back to page 1, there's no back arrow because you can't go further previously than 1. So we go to page 2 and we have forward and back. So when we get all the way to page 11, 10, 11, then we get no forward or next button arrow. So you see how that logic works? And you can make it to where there's a disabled button there that doesn't work if you don't want the button to just disappear. So if we go back to page 10, we get both buttons once again. See how that works? So when the page first loads, it gets an initial Ajax request to gather the first page worth of data. And this page never reloads. And then when the person's clicking to go to different pages, that's when an Ajax request is fired off. It's a function that has an Ajax request in it that simply asks PHP for another page. And we'll show you how that's done right now. Okay, we're going to start with the bare bones of an HTML5 web document. And mine is named Ajax Pagination Example.php. So I have a PHP page that's pretty much empty. And I'm going to start in the body element by putting the few elements that we need for this application in. First I'll put a div. I'm going to give that div an ID of results box. And I'll copy that div and right on top of it place another one. And this one I want to have an ID of pagination controls. So all we have in our body element so far is pagination controls div and the results box div. The results is where the whole list of data is going to display, and pagination controls is where the forward and next buttons will show for the user. Now under those two we're going to put in a script element. Make sure we close that script element. And initially when the page loads, what we're going to do is run a function called request page. And this is a custom function that we're going to program in just a second. And we're going to send one parameter. It's going to have one argument sent through it, which is 1. So by default the page is going to load the first page worth of data from the pagination results. And that first page is going to be an Ajax request. And that's all we're going to need for the HTML of this application. It's those 3 lines. And you can expand and enhance that later on. Now what we're going to do is place PHP in the top that has some code in it right here. And I'm going to explain every bit of code, and I also commented the code out for you. So what we're going to do first is connect to our database here, and this is so that we can load the first page worth of data and also send some important variable data through the Ajax request each time that we need a new page loaded in, or a new pagination result set loaded into the container results box here. So the first thing we do is connect to our database here. And we're using MySQL for the database communication. So just like the last tutorial that we did, I was using my testimonials database to show you guys a live example, and it's the same thing I've done in this lesson. So I'm selecting the count just to get the full count of how many testimonials there are in my testimonials table. So in my database I have a testimonials table, and one of the fields is approved, and that's an enum field that can be either 0 or 1. But I want to make sure approved is equal to 1 to only get the approved testimonials out. Or if you want to say where username equals Joe Schmo or whatever. So you can count all the rows that you want for a specific thing. Then we run the query using MySQL query, and we set our database connection variable here, and the second parameter is our SQL syntax, which is this. Then we fetch the row, and we have a row variable created from that, and we get the total rows variable established by saying row and its first and only index in its array. which will be the count, because that's all we requested from this query is the count. So now we have the total rows. Now we're going to specify how many results per page that we want, and that's going to be 10. And this is a variable that's going to be sent through the Ajax request each time. So you just establish that here, however many results you want per page. Then the next variable tells us the page number of our last page, and we name that variable last, and that's equal to the ceil function, which is a way to round a number up because we don't want a decimal number. And we take the total rows and divide that by the RPP, the rows per page, results per page. And that gives you the number, which is the last page in the result set. And then this next little bit of code makes sure that the last variable cannot be less than 1. So we say if the last page is less than 1, then last is equal to 1. We just don't want it to be a 0 or a negative number. And finally, we close the MySQL database connection here. And that's all the PHP that you're going to need in this side of the application. The rest of the PHP is going to be in a separate parser that I've called Pagination parser. And I'll show you that file in just a moment. So the last thing we need on the client side of our application in the Ajax Pagination example.php is some JavaScript here in the head tag. So let's go ahead and put in another script element in the head element of our page and make sure we close that script element. Now we're going to need a function called request page. So we type in function request page, open close parentheses, put an opening curly brace, go down a couple of lines and put in a closing curly brace, and there's your function nest all set up. Now this function is taking in one parameter. As you can see, when the page loads, we're asking it to load in page 1 into the results box container. So we're running the request page function with a parameter or an argument of 1. So we're going to pick up that argument as the variable pn, which stands for page number. Now the first thing within that function is we're going to assign a couple of object variables, which are object references for the results box div and the pagination controls div, which you can see are right here, pagination controls and results box. So that way we can affect their inner HTML more easily by just using these variables instead of saying document.getElementById and then the ID name. We can just use this variable here to affect their inner HTML when we need to, or do anything we want to those objects. So we're going to copy the results box variable and we're going to say results box dot inner HTML is equal to the page is loading message, or whatever loading message you want to have in there. You put loading results dot dot dot, or you can have an animated GIF show up. If you want to have a little fan loader or something, you can just put the animated GIF image tag right there in the inner HTML of the results box. And that way, while the new page worth of data is loading into that container, you can give some kind of animation or any words you want, whatever. I'm just going to put in the words loading results dot dot dot. Alright, I'm just going to collapse this PHP up because we're finished working with that. Then right under the loading results message, after the loading results message gets put into the results box, we're going to have an HTTP request. So we're going to pop that request in here, and this is the code that I just popped into place. And you can see the HR variable that's created is a new XML HTTP request object. So with this instance of an HTTP request object, we can run an Ajax call. So this Ajax object is going to post variables to a script called pagination parser.php, which is the script that I have right here ready to go, and I'm going to show you guys that in a moment. And what that script is designed to do is just gather up a certain result set from the database using the limit syntax in the SQL query. It's a very simple script. So that script is geared to just send back pretty much 10 results, and those results will be corresponding to whatever page is being requested out of the result set. And you can name your parser whatever you want. You can also make the actual page that you're on right here the parser if you program it correctly. But it might be more helpful just to have an external pagination parser.php. That way you can keep things a little more modular. And we set the content type to application/form URL encoded variables, because we're going to be sending 3 variables through this Ajax request right here. That's why we execute the send function or the send method on that Ajax object very last. We establish some specifics for the HR object and then we send it. Now another configuration that we need for this Ajax object is the onReadyStateChange function. Now this onReadyStateChange function and its corresponding if condition is just to see if the Ajax request has reached PHP and has come back successful with data. So within this if condition is basically where you can render your results that Ajax acquired, that Ajax got from PHP. And you can get that in the hr.responseText property of the Ajax instance. So the hr.responseText is all the data that PHP had echoed back to this request. Now the reason why you see me splitting that data is because I was putting double bars between all of the individual items coming out of the database. That way I can just easily split that whole string worth of data, and it's kind of formed into a custom array that I laid out, and I'll show you that in PHP when we go to the pagination parser in just a second. So the pagination parser script is spitting back a long string of data, and some of that data is separated by double bars, and that's where my array objects are. So I split that response text, that long string of data that PHP is giving me, by the double bars, and that will give me a data array. So once I have this data array, I can then loop over that array and then spit out some results. So before I run this for loop over my data array, I'm just going to establish an HTML output variable, because what I'm doing inside of the for loop is appending to that HTML output variable using the += syntax. That way I can put all of those 10 items in the array just by using this one line within the for loop. Okay, so once we have the return data from PHP, we put that into a data array by using the split method on the response text. Then we're going to iterate over that data array with a for loop. And you'd want to study how for loops work so you can fully understand this script. But if you already know, we're just going to establish the I variable as 0. Then we're going to say the condition is while I is less than the data array's length minus 1, then we're going to I++ and keep running the loop. So my data array is set up to bring back 10 items. So we just want this for loop to run 10 times over that array. Now this last little bit here where you see this item array for each item being derived by each of these array items in the data array, they're being split by the single bar. So I have the single bar character splitting up all the specific little variables for each row of results. So basically each item array, that's going to have the item ID, it's going to have the item name or whatever, title, whatever variables that you want to send over for each item. So we acquire the item array, and then finally in the HTML output we keep compounding to that variable whatever ID for the item that's coming through. And I also put another variable which is the second element in the index of that array. Now once I show you what PHP is echoing back to Ajax, it'll make more sense to you. Alright, so after that for loop, then we simply take the results box.innerHTML and we pack in all of the HTML output into that results box. Now I'll just show you a written representation of what would be in each item array. So let me just put a little comment here. And it would look like this. Whatever ID of that item, then it'll have a single bar, and then the title, another single bar, the date, and then some data or whatever. So that's what each of those rows are coming back as, is an item array. And I have bars that I'm putting in between each of the variables. That way I can split them easily in JavaScript when all that data, that long data string gets back. So basically I'm splitting a long data string twice, using double bars the first time and then single bars the second time to get to each individual array. So it's kind of like a multi-dimensional array without any associative identifiers. And this ID number gets accessed by using the item array object variable here and specifying its first element index. Then we get the title or the name, this variable, by using the second element index. And you can get the date by using the 2, and the data or text by using the 3. So this is 3, 2, 1, 0. Alright, so that's how the data arrays or the item arrays would be set up. Then finally down at the bottom we have the hr.send method, which is the send method for the Ajax object. And we're sending 3 variables to PHP each time this request page function is run. And the first variable is results per page. That means how many results we want per page. In our case, we made it 10. And we're sending the last. We want a variable for the last page to be sent. So we're sending the last page variable. And then the page number itself that the user is requesting to go to. And that's how the Ajax functionality is initiated, through the send method. So none of this code is actually going to matter or execute until you run the send method. Okay, so then underneath our Ajax request here, then we're going to have to change the pagination controls. So let me go ahead and collapse up the Ajax element, or the Ajax functionality. Then I put a little comment that says change the pagination controls, because each time the request page function is executed, we have to change the pagination controls to make the buttons go to different pages. So first thing we do is establish a pagination controls variable as empty. Then the next thing we do is we set an if condition, and only if there is more than 1 page worth of results we're going to give the user pagination controls. Only if there's more than 1 page worth of results. Because if there's only 1 page of results, maybe you only have 6 results, so you'll only have the first page, then there's no reason to give them pagination controls to go back and forth to other pages. But like I said, you can put other conditions in here to put like disabled buttons, like dead buttons that the person can see but not click. But I'd rather just give them nothing at all if there's no reason to go to anything. So within the condition to check to see if there's more than 1 page, we're going to run another condition to see if the page number is greater than 1. Because if the page number is greater than 1, then we need a previous button. So that's what this button is set up to be. This is our previous button that sends the user to the previous page. Only if we're not on page 1 anymore. We have to be on page 2 or greater to get the previous button. And we get the previous button by running the request page function, which is the Ajax mechanism, and we send the variable, the numeric variable of whatever the page number is, -1. That's how you get to the previous page. Then inside of the pagination controls variable, we compound another little bit of data that will show in between the 2 buttons, and that will say page, whatever the page number is, of however many pages there are. And I just put a little bit of space around them using the NBSP. But you'll style these things any way you want using CSS. Then the last little bit is just to see if we need the next button. So we check to see if the page number is not equal to the last page. That means we're not on the last page yet, so we need next button. And putting the next button in place is very similar to the previous button, but all you do is you put the word next, or I have the bracket here, the greater than bracket, and that's like a next symbol that's kind of universal for next, and we put PN +1 to make it go to the next page instead of PN -1 to go to the previous page. So it's pretty straightforward. And then you take the pagination controls element here and you affect its inner HTML property to pack all of those pagination controls into that element on the page. So basically every time this request page function runs, it's going to know what page the user wants to go to, and it's going to establish all the logic that you need for making the request for all that data from PHP. We're going to use Ajax for that. And then you change the pagination controls here directly after your Ajax request. So there is the whole length of the script for the client side of things. And here, I'll even open this one up. And this is the initial PHP that we need just to gather up some variables and run the first request. Alright, so that is the full extent of the client side of that application. Now the last thing we're going to do is discuss the pagination parser.php script. And this is a script that only gets accessed by the Ajax request. And what it's geared to do is only send back 1 page worth of data corresponding to the number of the page number that's being sent in, that's being posted to this script. And that's what gets sent back to the Ajax request from PHP. So the first thing we do is we put a comment that says make this script run only if there's a page number posted to this script. So we can say if is set the posted variable of page number, then all of the code in here will execute. If not, none of this code will execute. So within that condition, we're going to first gather up 3 posted variables. Remember in the Ajax Pagination example.php, in the Ajax request we're sending all of these 3 variables to the PHP script, and here we're scooping up those variables into local variables. First one we'll name results per page, RPP. The next one last, and that represents the last page in the results set, and PN represents the page number. And those are all posted variables coming from the Ajax request. Now this next little bit of code, make sure that the page number is not below 1 or more than our last page. So we say if the page number is less than 1, we're going to make the page number variable equal to 1, because it can never be 0 or a negative number. Else if the page number is greater than the last page, we're going to make the page number equal to the last page, because if we only have 11 pages, we don't want a reference to a page 12 or a page 13, because that will give us an empty result set. It just won't exist. Then the very next thing is we connect to our database. So you connect to your database using MySQL here, and then the very next line is we set the limit, which is the range of rows, the range of items to query from the database for the chosen page number. And if you want to really understand how pagination works, limit is a big part of how pagination works. So research the limit syntax in SQL and database queries to fully understand how you can limit a result set by a range of numbers. By putting 2 numbers in place, you can get a certain range of results out of the database and not all of them. So the limit functionality can get 1 or 2 numbers applied to it. If you put 1 number, you just get that many results out of the database. If you give it 2 numbers, you get a range of results in between 2 numbers. Okay, so now this is our query again, and this time it's just grabbing 1 page worth of rows by applying the limit. So here's our query syntax. So we're going to select certain variables or certain columns from our database table, which is named testimonials. So I'm selecting the ID field, first name, last name, date field from my testimonials table where approved is equal to 1. Then I'm going to order that by ID descending, and my limit syntax is then placed onto the very end. And I run that query here, and it has a while loop that loops over this result set. So this way we can pack a whole bunch of things into this data string. And remember when I was referencing to a long string of data that we're going to get back to JavaScript from PHP? This is where that long string of data is made. Now what you can do is use something like JSON or XML. If you want to use that kind of code structure to send all this variable data back, all this array data back, or you can just use a string like I'm doing. All I'm doing is taking a string and making it into array data in a custom sort of way by using single pipe and double pipe. So that means I have a long string of data that I can then easily chop up and disassemble back into variable form back in JavaScript. So this data string variable is established here with nothing in it at first. Then in this while loop is where we compound into that data string each one of the individual strings that holds the array data for each row. So I can send each ID, and then I put single pipe, first name from the database field, single pipe, last name from the database field, then single pipe. And you can see how I'm separating each of the individual variables with single pipe. Then at the very end I put the double pipe to separate it from the next row worth of data. So this will get popped in there 10 times. So basically you'll have a long string that looks like this. It'll look like, let's see, that, and then that, and then that 10 times in there. And that will give you your 10 rows that you need. And then in JavaScript you can just break that down using split. See how I break it down by the double pipes the first time, and then inside of the for loop I break it down by the single pipe the next time to get it all the individual variable data here that's being sent. So like I said, if you want to use a different approach that will make your script a little more bulky, actually, you can use JSON or XML format, or you can use a very lean method like mine, if it's possible for you, and you can just use pipes. Just use the pipe symbol or whatever custom delimiter you want. You can make these say poop snot, and then every time if you split by poop snot instead of splitting by the bar, then you'll get access. So it doesn't have to be the bar symbol there. It could be any custom delimiter you want. Or in this case where we're using the double pipes, you can put something like that, and then that, and then on this side put that, and that can be your custom delimiter. It doesn't have to be just double pipes, it can be anything you want. But in this case I'm just using double pipes. And then to split the individual variable data, I just use a single pipe as delimiter. Then finally we close the database connection using MySQL I close on the database connection variable, and then we echo the results back to Ajax, which is the long string of data. And then JavaScript can break that data down by using the split method. You could also probably just send all of your HTML, echo all HTML here back to JavaScript, but I find it easier to let JavaScript do the individual parsing of the array data that's coming back from the database results set. So you can break it down here into HTML and then send it back, or you can do like I did and use JavaScript to set up your HTML. Alright, so that's both files fully explained. Okay, so that wraps up Ajax and PHP pagination core programming. So we're not using any third-party libraries, and it's all our own code. So I hope I've made everything clear. If you have any questions or considerations, just type a comment below. And if you could take a second to rate this video up, I would appreciate that. And if you're not subscribed to my channel, go ahead and subscribe and you'll get all of the future material that we put out. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.